Hey, Low Code Approach listeners, this is Wendy Haddad. Before we jump into this week's episode, I wanted to let you know that we are starting to plan for the next season, and we want to make sure we hear from you on what is most important and relevant in terms of the topics that we'll be choosing. So if you could open a web browser and pop over to aka.ms/low code topic request, that's aka.ms/low code topic request, all one word. Fill out that brief survey on what topics and what subjects, what guests you might want to hear from. And who knows, maybe it'll make it into the next season of the podcast. Thanks so much and happy listening.
Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of the Low Code Approach. I am Sean Feeney, always powered by coffee, never enough sleep, and I'm joined by...
I'm Wendy Haddad, and I never get enough sleep with 3 kids, and I'm joined by...
I am unsure if that really was Wendy with that really long pause, and I am late to the podcast today. My name is Ken Aguilar, Principal Program Manager. And Sean, who are we joined by today?
Today we are joined by Henri Jambes, Principal Program Manager, Lead for Copilot Studio on the PowerCat team. Henri, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for having me today. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Hey, Henri, so I read your title out, the Principal Program Manager, Lead for Copilot Studio on the PowerCat team, but what does that actually mean? Can you give us a little bit more information about what does that do?
Absolutely. So the PowerCat team, it's the Microsoft Power Platform Customer Advisory Team. We're a team part of the Power Platform engineering organization at Microsoft who helps our customers successfully adopt and deploy Power Platform solutions. And as Copilot Studio is part technically from the Power Platform stack, I help customers successfully deploy Copilot Studio in their organization.
All right, so we're going to have to define Copilot Studio a little bit. For context, we had Jack Robotham on talking about Power Virtual Agents. But now we aren't talking about Power Virtual Agents anymore. We're talking about Copilot Studio. So who moved my cheese? What's going on? What's changed?
That's a great question. So back in November 2023 at Microsoft Ignite, we announced Copilot Studio. So it's a new product. Power Virtual Agents was absorbed into a new product called Copilot Studio. And so Copilot Studio does everything that Power Virtual Agents was doing. It's the low-code conversational AI platform, but it also does more because Copilot Studio is now the extensibility platform for all Microsoft first-party copilots, starting with the Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Interesting. So one thing I do want to point out, I've heard Reza say this, and folks in the community, you all know Reza, and right, great YouTuber and whatnot. PowerCat has nothing actually to do with cats, so let's just establish that it's full off. Okay.
End of episode. Thank you, Ken.
So, Henri, should makers learn new skills? Is this a drastic change? Is there anything new right now inside of Copilot Studio?
So I feel like, first, I think it's for anyone who's used Power Apps, Power Automate, or other low-code solutions, I think Copilot Studio is one of the easiest to grasp and start with. It's very easy to deploy and get started, specifically because you can start just by pointing your new Copilot to a website, and your bot effectively will start to be able to answer questions right from knowledge gathered from your website. So you don't start from a blank page, a blank canvas. You can use the Copilot Studio's Copilot to describe what you want to achieve with your bot, and it will design a topic for you to help you. And for low-code makers who are using Power Apps, formulas, RFX. We use the same formula language in Copilot Studio. For makers who use Power Automate Cloud Flows, you can actually integrate with other systems through Power Automate from Copilot Studio. So makers will feel right at home in Copilot Studio.
So, Henri, I want to double click on something that you just said. You mentioned people can identify with Copilot Studio by embedding it on a web page, but let's take a look across Power Platform. And can I embed Copilots into my apps? Can I utilize Copilots that I've generated from Copilot Studio in my flows? Can you talk a little bit about use cases and where that might be applied?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are many ways to deploy and embed your Copilots. You could add your Copilot to your Power page, to your website. You can add a Copilot as a chat widget on your own custom website, or if you have an employee-facing scenario, maybe the best way to deploy your Copilot is through Teams as a Teams bot. And that's what, for example, PayPal has done for their 40,000 employees. So they have built a chatbot leveraging generative AI, connecting to various data sources, not just Microsoft. It goes to ServiceNow, SharePoint, and other data sources to generate answers using generative AI and answer employee questions.
A question that often comes up from very large enterprises is we have extensibility into very common things, but what about things like SAP? Can we actually utilize large ERP systems, large data sets, and things along those lines inside of what we see as now as Copilot Studio?
Absolutely. The beauty of Copilot Studio and the fact that it's sitting within the Power Platform is that it can leverage all Power Platform native connectors, so more than 1,000 today, including SAP. And customers can also use their own custom connectors. So it has like great extensibility scenarios. We also do offer some samples to integrate it with Salesforce, ServiceNow, Genesis, in case, you're talking with a bot on a website and then you need to escalate to a live agent. You can, of course, do that with Dynamics 365, but we also have ways to integrate with all of these solutions and more. So it's highly integratable and not just with Microsoft.
But how do businesses, especially as you get involved with businesses, how do they actually identify the right opportunities and good candidates for Copilot? And what might not be a good candidate for Copilot Studio?
Yeah, no, great question. I think most customers start with low-hanging fruit scenarios to automate. So they will look at tasks that can be automated. So for example, HR questions as employees keep asking, and it's always the same answer. Maybe the answer is in a policy document, in an FAQ somewhere, but people don't search. So that's a great scenario where instead of having a human answer the question, you try to automate it. Prior to generative AI, what you would do is anticipate every question a user would ask and script the answer in your bot. That would be very time consuming. And that's now why most organizations are simply configuring the bot so that it points to your knowledge sources, and the bot will automatically generate answer based off that knowledge source. And what's great for the maker is that instead of spending time duplicating, your FAQ content or your policy content from your knowledge source into your bot, you simply point your bot to your knowledge source. And so it makes intelligent answers based on, Azure OpenAI GPT models that we're using. And it's less time maintaining the bot, because as you add more content to your knowledge source, the bot will automatically pick that up and answer more questions.
I have been trying to not just always jump into security and governance, and it's just like it's stabbing me in the side right now.
It's a growth area, Ken.
I'm trying to grow, Wendy, but it's really, really hard. It is extremely hard. So you've talked about the data. I set myself up for that question there. How do customers feel? What's been some of the feedback or the questions that you receive from customers about their data? Are you training the model with it, and so on?
Of course. Yeah. The first, I think the question we've received from every customer as soon as generative AI is involved is, do you use our data to train your model? And the answer is no, we don't train our OpenAI models with customer data. That's really absolutely clear. So there is a customer boundary. And just like when you put your data in Dataverse, Microsoft does not access your data and does not use your data. It's your data. And that's exactly the same with AI. We do use GPT models, but the key is for pre-trained, and that's why it's already trained, and we don't use the data to further train the model. So that's the number one security concern that we quickly address. Other concerns are, of course, like how do you monitor the answers? How do you prevent hallucinations? How do you secure access to the data? So there are multiple ways we do that. Azure OpenAI already has some moderation capabilities that come natively with the model. But as Copilot Studio, when you use generative answers, we actually add a moderation layer, and we try to catch hallucinations so that when you generate an answer, whenever we have a doubt, we prefer to return a blank answer, and the bot will say, sorry, I don't know, instead of something that may be false. There is no way to prevent it 100% of the time, because that's the nature of non-deterministic large language model. That's their nature. but we do try to catch hallucinations. So an example is like if your knowledge source contains numbers and we will use those numbers as part of the answer that the bot generates, we will try to check that the source has the exact same numbers as in the response. For example, same for dates, so that we can try to catch that the answer is grounded and is not coming up with numbers or dates, things like that.
So responsible AI and responsible use of it is what we try, not what we try, what we promote, right? We absolutely, it's built into the product.
I was going to say, so that's the number one security concern. So I'm going to bring up a second security concern I hear. I actually heard back in the PVA days, but now I'm sure it extends to Copilot as well, is what about the chat transcripts? And who has access to those transcripts? How are we protecting those transcripts? And what are we doing with the data? Where does it go? Can you speak a little bit to that, please?
Yes, absolutely. So every conversation in Copilot Studio is stored in a Dataverse table called conversation transcripts. And as with any table in Dataverse that is secured for user team ownership, only the users with the appropriate permissions to read records from that table will get access to the transcripts from those conversations. So these are secured, and you can actually manage who access or who does not access these transcripts.
So I have this really crazy question, Henri, and it maybe has to do with a little bit about data boundaries and where the data resides and things along those lines. So let's say hypothetically that I have something that's maybe of dual use purposes. Dual use, for those folks who may not be aware, is I have a commercial and maybe a military use for the data that's in my organization. So the data might need to reside in a specific location. How do we try to govern and protect that data to ensure that it stays, say, in the United States versus being used by a bot inside of Europe?
Great question. So in terms of, data boundaries, initially, most of the generative AI capabilities in Copilot Studio were only available in the US region. But now for geographies like Europe, France, India, and others, we have local Azure OpenAI capacity so that when you use generative answers, the data and queries don't leave for example, in Europe, it doesn't leave the EU boundary. One thing to note, though, is that if you're using generative answers over a website, we do use Bing for the search, and Bing is a global service. So the geo boundary does not apply for this one.
Hey, Henri, so I'm going to pivot away from the security and governance questions. Otherwise, it would be a Ken cast the entire day. I know Ken is yelling at a cloud right now. But I want to talk a little bit more about implementation and almost like the mindset an organization should have. Now, we have been talking about Copilot Studio, but if anybody inside and outside of Microsoft goes and types in Copilot, there are lots of Copilots that come across. So when you are setting up an organization to utilize Copilots, how do they know which one to use, where, when, and how? Within Copilot Studio, Sales Copilot, all these good Copilots that are coming out, where do I start?
Great question. So I think it's really, you start from the use case and then you try to map it with the most appropriate Copilot we have at Microsoft. And I know that we have a lot. So the Sales Copilots would be very good for anyone tracking opportunities, leads, wanted to connect to their CRM system, be it Dynamics or Salesforce from, for example, Outlook. Customer service, same for any type of support scenario and customer care. Copilot Studio is typically used for two scenarios, for standalone Copilots, when you want to build your own chatbot, your own bot, your own Copilot, or when you want to extend an existing Copilot. So today, the Copilot that you can extend with Copilot Studio is the Copilot for Microsoft 365. And it's actually a mechanism for which you can make your Copilot smarter and be able to handle more things. You actually extend that Copilot with Copilot Studio. So a typical scenario would be if from the Copilot for Microsoft 365, you want to ask it like, what does my Salesforce pipeline look like, my opportunities? That can trigger a specific conversational AI plugin in Copilot Studio that will be able to use connectors to get information from Salesforce, summarize it, and send it back to the user as part of the Microsoft 365 Copilot.
So, Henri, You mentioned all these great questions to ask as you're going through the implementation for Copilots, but how does PowerCat support customers in this manner? Like what is that implementation building journey that you go on with the customers, and how does PowerCat assist?
Great question. So that we have multiple angles to our job and how we ultimately try to benefit all customers and the product itself to make it better. So that's why you may know PowerCat from the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. The primary customers I work with are some of the biggest customers we have on Copilot Studio, and we do learn a lot from them. So it's really a two-way relationship. Like we do everything we can to make them successful in their implementation. So we provide guidance, best practices. We do review the architecture together. We brainstorm, we challenge them, but we also do learn from them because their feedback is crucial to us and they help us make the product better. So a lot of the feature requests that we do implement in the product come from those customers, not just the top customers. Like we also are very embedded in the community. For typically on Copilot Studio, like you find me very present on the community forums. And we use those signals to also be the voice of the community and the voice of the customer with the product group so that we can influence our release waves and release plans with customer feedback. And specifically on implementation, all those customers we work closely with, they help us draft guidance that we then want to make public and share with as many customers and partners out there. So that's why we have published the Copilot Studio Implementation Guide. And it contains a ton of best practices, architecture, patterns, guidance, examples that any partner and customer can reuse actually. And we keep enriching it and we love the feedback we get on it. And so as we get questions on security, ALM, governance, those feed us as PowerCat to add more content to that deck and other pages and assets that we deliver, but to globally make everyone successful at scale.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, as a former customer and a former receiver of PowerCat services, one, they are absolutely great. Two, Henri said that customers of all sizes can interact with PowerCat. I've seen that as well. And also, speaking of former customers, we also have another former customer on our podcast, Wendy, who may have more to add.
I know. I'm just going to say the guides that you guys publish are really helpful and a great place to start if you want to dive deeper, and especially because you put it in a logical order. I think sometimes people go to our docs and they get a little lost or they click around. And so you kind of do a great job of step 1, step 2, step 3. And so I do want to emphasize that resource and we'll add it to the show notes. We are going to have to land the plane soon. I want to end with one more thing. Because you work so closely with our customers, I, on the field, often hear customers asking, what are other customers doing? And I realize you may or may not be able to share names, so where appropriate, could you just walk us through? You added some examples at the beginning, but maybe an end-to-end example. Let's just do a deeper dive on one major success story, how they transformed the business, how did they work with you, how long did it take, skills, and then what was the results at the end? I think just so that customers can really visualize this in their own business as we wrap up this episode.
Sure. So there are so many scenarios for copilots and chatbots. So the two main categories are customer-facing or internal-facing employee chatbots. So I already mentioned PayPal. It was a great partnership because they were a very early customer adopting generative answers when the feature was still in preview. But because of our tight partnership between the product group and PayPal, we supported them during the preview and they gave us tons of feedback to make the feature and product better for all customers to benefit from once the feature became generally available. But for more standard chatbots, like the one Rabobank developed, and we have a customer story, maybe we can share it somewhere. It's actually a customer-facing bot. And customers have two ways to interact with it, like you can chat over their website, but you can also call in the bank. And actually, Copilot Studio is the tool that picks up the phone and answers, and then based on your intent, will route you to the correct agent to help you with your query. These are the types of customer we partner up with. And we just published a blog post as well, like with many other customers we work closely with in their implementation and adoption of Copilot Studio. One I love to call out these days is Holland America Line, where the Copilot on their website will help customers book a cruise and make smart recommendation on packages and rooms they should book or excursions they should book as well during their cruise. And we are very excited about that one.
That is a phenomenal example. Give us some discount codes for that cruise line, please. There's another short one that I thought of as well, Henri, and that is employee verification. I can't name the customer, but they actually integrated their Copilot into that particular process where any employee, and then also extended it now out externally, can just query and ask for employee verification. It then subsequently connects in the Power Automate and then emails them the letter and so on and so forth with the verification. Just a quick end-to-end loop. That all used to be just one manual process that would sometimes take weeks. So you don't have to boil the ocean. You can start with a very simple process.
Oh, absolutely. You can start simple, and you should.
That was awesome. And I agree. Yeah, definitely start simple on this. Henri, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. I'm excited to take the transcript from this episode and point my Copilot to it and have an automated version of you, Henri. It's going to be great. We're going to utilize it for other episodes.
So that's something I didn't mention. Like I was going to say, one of the biggest challenges also set appropriate expectations with the AI revolution. Let's keep in mind that AI are not necessarily much smarter than any human, and it's still AI, even though it's made dramatic progress and it's great to use. I think we still need to specifically target the use cases where we can apply it and benefit from it. And it's not the silver bullet that will solve every problem.
So Henri is saying we need to have him back on the podcast. I think that's what he was saying.
That is
there.
a great way to close the show. It is not the silver bullet, but we definitely need to get Henri back on this podcast. I would be really interested in checking in some time to hear other success stories and how new features are being released for Copilot Studio and how organizations are adapting to those features. Once again, Henri, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great.